Hello, welcome to the Pit Stop Podcast. I'm Braydon Dowler-Coltman. I'm joined by Jordan Dowler-Coltman, ever F1 enthusiast. We had I would say a rather lackluster race last week with the Austrian Grand Prix. We've got basically the exact same race coming up this weekend. We're going to be recapping last week and setting up next week. How you doing, Jordan? Good. Here we go. Okay, so we had a pretty boring race, I would say, only in so much that not a lot of change happened. We had some nice kind of battles in the middle there between Lando Norris, Sergio Perez. Yuki Tsunoda got into the top 10 there. Max Verstappen finishing first, proving that Red Bull is much more than I think any other team anticipated or perhaps expected this year. Led by their phenom Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton and Bottas in the Mercedes vehicles finished second and third. Jordan, what are your thoughts? Obviously, I've mentioned that I thought it was rather boring. What did you think of the Austrian Grand Prix last weekend?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of drama. It wasn't like we've seen a couple of races where, right near the end, there's a mad scramble to the finish. We knew who was going to win pretty much right from the get-go, right from pole. Verstappen had the superior car and he drove it superbly. Tire strategy was a factor throughout the race, but I think both Mercedes and Red Bull's teams did what they expected the cars to do, and they got the results they kind of expected. It was interesting. Lewis did take the late pit stop, gave up you knew he didn't have a chance to catch Verstappen, so he gave up some sort of overall time. When you look at the final, I think he finished like 35 something seconds behind Verstappen, but that's because he added soft tires and went with a fast lap, which he did get, which is an extra point, which could be really, really critical down the line. So some late strategic decisions by both those teams. But yeah, Red Bull is who we thought they were. Mercedes just hasn't done enough and hasn't yet quite got their car to stay competitive, race in and race out with Red Bull. McLaren is who we thought they were. It was interesting. They didn't really fight for position for most of the race, knowing that they also just did not have the pace. So, we saw pretty early on, Lando Norris gave up the position he had to Sergio Perez. And, some people would argue, oh, well, you should still be fighting for a podium. But it's like, the truth was he knew he wasn't going to keep the car there. That I think McLaren is fully accepting and understanding that they are not chasing Mercedes and Red Bull. They are running away from Ferrari and in some of the other sort of third place teams. And McLaren obviously winning third place last year, they'll be looking to do the same this season and get Lando Norris as many points as the drivers as he can. And he's had a superb season. Still the only driver. Well, he is the only driver to have collected points in every race, and he keeps that streak alive. He's yet to go a race without points, so that's great news. But
it'd be nice to see Ricciardo step up a little bit more when it comes to finishes. He's in a strong vehicle. Norris is driving it lights out, and we talked about the transition. He transitioned from Renault, now Alpine, another vehicle that we anticipated or projected last week on our podcast that would have perhaps a stronger outing than they did this week. Ocon finishing 14th, Alonso 9th, struggled. But somebody that we keep kind of overshadowing here, Pierre Gasly, he finished, I think, 4th or 5th in the qualifying and had just an unfortunate, he was out of the race 4 or 5 laps, I think.
Yeah, he got obviously a little bit of help because Bottas was knocked down 3 spots from where he qualified, which was second, because of his spin in the pits during practice we talked about last week. So Gasly did get a little bit of assistance there, but yeah, he didn't finish lap 1. He made contact pretty early on and then just had some issues and they weren't able to get the car to work, so they had to retire him. Definitely disappointing for Gasly, who's had a great season. Again, he is just sort of fit into this AlphaTauri team so well after, losing the seat in Red Bull and a couple of years ago, and everyone's sort of making a big deal out of it. He just seems like this is a really great fit. I think he and his teammate in Tsunoda are enjoying working together. They're both, just young drivers with a lot to prove, but also, they continue to get better and better, and that's exciting. The other guy who had a disappointing outing and also didn't finish was George Russell. And, we talked last week, he had a good chance of getting some points for Williams because I think he qualified 10th.
Qualified really well this
year. And unfortunately, he just couldn't get his car to the finish line because it had hydraulic fuel issue or fluid issues, and that's nothing the driver can do at that point. You just the machine failed you. Had to have been frustrating. He was superb, and we've unfortunately George Russell's had a few of these. Remember, he had the seat last year covering for Lewis, and there was a car issue too, and a pit stop issue where they mixed up the tires that cost him a better finish in that race, and probably even the win. I mean, bad luck for Russell.
These guys have been racing for years, like since they were kids, right? So yeah. I'm curious, what is more frustrating, having not finishing where you perhaps expect to finish on in the race, or having a vehicle malfunction, or having an issue come up that you just can't control.
Well, I think for the drivers, it's probably more frustrating when the car fails you, because that's out of your hands, or even a pit stop that just goes poorly, because you have nothing. There's nothing you could do. You could be driving the perfect race. Your lines are great. Your tire management is perfect. Everything's going superbly. And then in a split second, it's gone for whatever reason. That's obviously, I think, more frustrating as a driver. Yeah. When you make a mistake as a driver, you're probably frustrated, but you're frustrated with yourself.
Yeah.
But at least there you can, there's something you can learn from it. On the other side of it, you're not the engineers. You're not the, So that's got to be a different level of frustration.
Sport in that, you're not playing as you are playing as a team the whole time, but there's very specific roles in that team. Pit stop, it's very important that all of the engine or all the mechanics or whoever's working on the vehicle, they're quick, and the driver has his responsibility. We've even talked about people up in the sky that have an important role in a race. So it's fascinating when it comes down to frustration. Where does that kind of lie, and how does it come up? So yeah, like we said, frustrating for George Russell, frustrating for Pierre Gasly. They're sure to have better races next week. They have an opportunity to race the exact same race. Any final thoughts on the Austrian Grand Prix? Jordan's shaking his head. Nothing, because it was not what we anticipated. And hopefully next week will be a lot better.
Do you or someone you know own a small business? Are you looking to grow or to reach new customers? Hey, why not let us help? HatTrick is looking for unique brands, businesses, and products to advertise on our show. You can find out how we can help spread the word about your business by contacting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
All right, we've got the exact same race coming up this weekend. It's at the RedBull Ring. It's not the Styrian Grand Prix, but it is the Austrian Grand Prix, 7 a.m., July 4th. We looked into whether or not maybe they would turn the track around and go counterclockwise, but it appears, if I'm not mistaken, that it's the exact same race. Perhaps weather will be different. Perhaps qualifying will be different. One thing to note quickly, and I'm going to read this because I'm not too sure what all of this means, but in an interesting move, Pirelli has nominated different tire combinations for the Styrian and Austrian Grand Prix, despite the races being held on the same track and just a week apart. So for this for this race upcoming at the Austrian Grand Prix, the P0 White Hard will be the C3, the P0 Yellow Medium, the C4, and the P0 Red Soft, the C5. So I'll leave that to tire enthusiasts to figure out what that really means. Beyond those changes, Jordan, what other storylines are going into the weekend? What should we expect at the Austrian Grand Prix?
I think we should expect Mercedes to come back swinging. I think we have often seen in the past that Mercedes has sometimes taken punches, has sometimes taken, a knockdown in one of these kind of races where they lose badly, and they more often than not have been able to bounce back. That's what has found them so much success in the last 7 years, and that's obviously become Lewis's bread and butter. He has a bad race. He usually doesn't have too many of them in a row. I would argue last race wasn't a bad race for Lewis Hamilton. I think he did everything he could with the machine underneath him. It's now time for the team to make some upgrades. There was a lot of question marks around what Mercedes' strategy was this season as far as car upgrades. It sounds like now that they know they're in a real fight to the finish here for championship, that they're going to start making some of those upgrades. We don't know exactly what that means and in which races we're going to start to see them. It's difficult when you only have a 1 week interval. And in this case, you've had this will be the third race in 3 weeks. So very little time to be working on the car in between. But the one advantage I would argue between last week and this week, as opposed to last week and the previous week before that, there's no travel. You're in the same place. You're in the same space. The conditions are all the same. You can
if you stay in between. The drivers have probably taken a little
but the cars aren't traveling anywhere.
Yeah.
The circus that follows these teams around is sitting pat in Austria. You're in the same garage for a week. You can work on your car, you can make adjustments, change your whatever package they're going to work on. And Mercedes is certainly not going to just roll over and hand the season to Verstappen and to Red Bull. That's the last thing that they want to do. The other thing I will say, however, is that this is a very, very good opportunity for Red Bull to take a decisive lead in the season. From their perspective, it would be 3 wins in a row. That would be huge if Verstappen can win. They'd get an unbelievable opportunity for Red Bull. He didn't win. Perez was on the podium a couple weeks ago, but the point being, Red Bull as a team, looking at the constructors race, is in a really good position to be leaving their home track after back-to-back races with just a very, very good lead, and something that they'll definitely want to carry forward into the rest of the year. I also think there are some, interesting storylines concerning some of the other teams that are there. As we've talked about, Lando Norris and McLaren did have a very good race, but that felt like they just didn't have the pace they needed last week. I would look for them to be pushing, especially during qualifying, to see what if anything they get out of that car. And then the other thing, as I said, conditions are going to be what the conditions are going to be. But if they're not the exact same as last week, that's going to offer opportunities for drivers with different strategic plans. And we don't know what these tires necessarily are going to contribute, but the teams are going to find that out through practices Friday and Saturday, and then obviously into qualifying. And we'll know pretty quickly whether or not these tires are going to make an impact, because it's possible that they will too, strategy wise. Yeah. The thing we did learn last week was, this is a race course. You can push for a one-stop strategy, but I think some teams looked at that as maybe not working as well as they had originally planned. Not that the tires didn't last, but they lost so much more pace than they anticipated. I think on the harder tires, they could go long enough, but they weren't competitive with them. So we might see a few teams look for undercuts and a few opportunities for a couple more stops, but we'll see. It could be just as ho-hum, cold cut and dry as it was last week.
How close do you think qualifying will be to what we saw last week in terms of positioning?
Again, lots of factors. The teams that do well at these tracks seem to do well at these tracks. Mercedes is going to qualify well. Verstappen seems to have unbelievable pace, and he likes this track. Obviously, he won on it last week. I would expect him to do well again, but conditions could be the factor. There's a couple drivers who qualify better, when they're fighting off some conditions. The other guy, I think, like we mentioned in the previous segment, Pierre Gasly has something to get back. He wants to be able to get his car all the way through the race, but he qualified really well last week. So it's possible that he's even able to get a little bit better position on the starting grid, depending on how the car performs. But no, it's really hard to say. It's a weird thing when you would say, well, if the conditions are the same, the track's the same, the drivers are the same. The only thing that's changing is whatever upgrades or changes have been made to the cars. You should be looking at similar results, but this isn't a video game simulation. There's so many factors that come into play. We saw during practice last week, a lot of teams pushing the cars right to the edge of this track and having a lot of issues with it. We had no cautions, no yellow flag, no sustained yellow flags. We had a couple little moments of contact early on. Obviously, that's what cost Gasly his opportunity to finish the race, but nothing, no serious accident, no safety car. But I will point out there were a couple close calls. Lewis almost lost it on a turn at one point, pushing right to the edge of that sort of track limit. So it's a very fun and competitive course, but hopefully it can be a little more competitive than it was last week, and somebody can give Max a run for his money.
So we usually do P1, 2, 3 predictions. I think it'll be fun because the race is much more than just the top 3 contenders. Who are your projections for P4, 5, and 6 this weekend?
Okay, well, to do this, I have to first do 1, 2, 3 in my head. Okay, so 4, 5, and 6?
That's right.
Out of qualifying? Or in the race?
Final race. In the race.
Okay. Sergio Perez, 4th.
4. Okay.
Lando Norris, 5th.
Uh-huh.
Charles Leclerc,
Oh.
6th.
All right. Well, I've got a very similar prediction to yours with Perez in 4, Norris in 5, but I've got our guy Gasly in 6. I think that he is frustrated, as we mentioned in the last topic there, about not finishing, qualifying so well and not finishing, wanting to come back, same ring, same race, and finish well. That's who I've got 4, 5, and 6. Jordan, any final thoughts on what we're going to see this weekend?
No, I think that it's the factors that we really need to know as we go into the race, or what the weather report says. I think, just from like a racing fan perspective, the ideal here at this course would be like half a race under regular conditions and half a race under like wet conditions.
Yeah,
and there was a little concern last week. I know there was
snow in there.
No snow. It's not that time of Austria, but there was some concern, early on last week that there were some clouds on the radar and maybe we'll get some precipitation. We haven't had a wet race yet this season. So that's something we can look forward to at some point. And it's always then you just throw all your cards out and you see what happens. Cause some drivers perform really well. Yeah. And even some of the better drivers just can't handle the wet conditions, but this would be a fun course for it. Cause it's it's long straightaways and it's not too technical a course to combat from that perspective. So it'd be fun if it was wet. That'd be my hope, but that's not my prediction.
It would be fun if it were a lot of things. If a lot of changes happen during the race in terms of positioning, lots of good battles. Those are always what's fun to watch. It's and this is a pretty short race too in terms of the distance and the laps. You want the changes, you want the battles, you want to see that competition in race. It's kind of annoying when they get so far ahead of each other that you're just kind of hoping that their times cut down. One final thing, this is going to be the first race that we see since COVID hit that we've got a full capacity race. We're bound to see about 60,000 people at this race. I don't know if it carries the same kind of home court advantage or value for the racers to have cheering fans, but for us at home, it's always fun to watch that excitement at the track. Bound to be a good race. Austrian Grand Prix this weekend, July 4th, 7 a.m. As always, set your PVR if you live here in Canada. All right, that was the Pit Stop Podcast. The Pit Stop Podcast is presented by HatTrick Sports and is a member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. The show is produced by Jordan and Braydon Dowler-Coltman each week, but mainly Jordan. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for listening. The Ordinary Podcasting Network wishes to acknowledge that the lands on which our conversations take place include Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and the Nakota Sioux peoples, as well as the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. And we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live, create, and share stories on these territories.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network intends to engage in conversations and dialogue which acknowledge that reconciliation is not a destination, but a journey, and that we remain committed to practicing our craft in a decolonized space.